That is exactly what I needed to say. Okay, hi. Well, welcome everybody to Emotional Intelligence in the Hybrid Environment. David, as you just saw before, or on your screen somewhere, is leading us today, and his special guest is Coach Hayley. So we are going to get twice the fun today because we got two people giving you this stuff. Can you get me to the next slide if you don't mind? Okay, so what you've joined today is a seminar and a webinar from ALV. ALV stands for Untitled Coaching. And what we do here is a blend of career coaching, health and wellness coaching, leadership coaching, and life coaching. Today, we're talking primarily about leadership coaching, and what we do with that is help elevate you to the next level. So leaders are not born, they're made. And it's important to us that you love your life. That's what Ama La Vida actually means, is to love your life. And that's what we want you to do. So everything we're presenting to you is to help you shape out what you're doing in leadership and love your life more. I'm going to speak a little bit here at the beginning. My name is Shari. I should have introduced myself. I'll be honest with you, I've not moderated before. I usually am the one webinaring. I am a coach here, and I also sit on our relationship strategist team. And I work alongside these two very, very talented coaches. And I'm going to just go through some logistics and beginning stuff. Then I'm going to go off. I'm going to monitor the chat. I'll worry about making sure your questions get asked in there. I'll provide some resources and links while we're in there, but I will leave it up to David and Hayley to give you all the information. So there is, again, David again. He's one of our leadership coaches on staff here, and a very, very good coach at that. And then joining him today is, next slide, please, David, is Hayley, and she's also a leadership coach. I will tell you, they both also do career coaching, and they are both really sharp, wonderful coaches. So the information you're getting today is spot on best practices. Next slide, please. Okay, we started doing this already, but feel free, if you haven't, drop stuff in the chat. Who you are, where you're from, what company you're with. If you want, feel free. Can you next slide, please? Feel free to also let us know, is this your first event? If you're a member here already, tell us who your coach is. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn if you'd like. If you wanted to connect with each other, that's fine too. Anything you want, throw it in there. Everybody can see it. And as soon as I'm done with this part, I'll be monitoring the chat as well. Next slide, please, David.
So awesome.
Yay. Okay, so we're being recorded. I think I already said that earlier, and every one of you should have gotten the "we are recording now," and then you have to hit got it. That'll be sent out afterwards for you. Any future trainings that you might want to see from us, you will find all of our listings at Eventbrite. I'm going to drop that. Just give me a moment. I'm going to actually drop that link for you right in the chat right now. No, I'm not. I'm going to drop it in the chat as soon as I'm done, and I'll leave that there for you. Be present. Take your notes. Screenshot pages that you want to say. Ask your employer to pay for things. This is free, but ask your employer to pay for coaching for you. You could coach with David or Hayley, or any one of our wonderful coaches here, and we can teach you how to do that. We have a module that will help you ask for those funds. Also, we'd love for you to schedule a consult with our leadership team, and I will also drop that in the chat at some point throughout the day for you as well. All right, next slide, please. All right, now I am going to turn it over to David and Hayley so they can talk to you about why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing today. Any questions? Again, I'll be monitoring the chat. You can just pop in if you see anything. David and Hayley have asked that we ask questions in real time, so I will be interrupting, asking questions, and hopefully getting you all the information that you need. I'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and thank you ahead of time, Hayley. Hayley, I invite you to jump in anytime. I know there's a couple times that I have you coming in deliberately, but anytime, because I do want this to be as much of a conversation as anything else.
Really?
The topic came up because we were discussing the hybrid environment and how absolutely tricky it could be. And when you read statistics, when you hear reports,
Okay, that makes me feel better. So I was like, oh no. Do you think I should talk to, like, who should I talk to about getting on like those?
that was a very awesome public share. Hopefully we'll be able to get you onto something a little bit later. But with the tricky environment, we are looking at how you can actually use emotional intelligence to increase the relatedness, to make a positive difference in a positive environment. And Hayley, I would dare to say that some of our suggestions are just good for emotional intelligence in a workplace in general, whether it was a hybrid environment or not. So if there's something that you feel is really super unique to a hybrid versus the general environment, we'll try to call it out. Or if anybody has any questions, we definitely want to cover that.
Yeah.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to ask really quick, how many people are working in a hybrid? Drop a one in the chat if you're currently in a hybrid work environment. Yeah. Oh, lots of ones coming in, yeah. Wow. So this is very pertinent, very hybrid. Yes, very good. Awesome.
I only see ones.
Yes.
I only see ones. How about that? We're going to talk about that. That is not necessarily consistent with everything, but that's good. And our objective is, again, that you walk away with some ideas. Maybe at least my hope is that you'll walk away with at least one idea that you are either doing and you want to do more of, or perhaps you hadn't considered previously. And then we could talk about that. So one of the things I do want to discuss is start with some definitions. And we're going to talk about emotional intelligence in a little bit, but I want to talk about the hybrid environment first. And by hybrid, I mean any combination where somebody's working partially remote. So it could be somebody's working a few days. It could be a population that goes in and yet a population's at home or wherever they're choosing to work. So all of that I'm counting as hybrid. So I hopefully that gets us at least on the same playing field from the start. And Hayley kind of already started us going a little bit deeper dive than the one. So when you're looking at your art organization, is it all in? Is it in consideration? Are there anybody out there that's not a one? Or heck no, we're not a four. We had a couple people join. Is everybody still a one? You could just put the one again. Look, we got a couple, we got a two. 1, 2, way to go, Anya. So it really does look like we have a totally all-in hybrid population. In the US, actually 74% of companies are now hybrid. Many of them were hybrid before. 47% of those were actually hybrid before the pandemic. I think the pandemic is seen as the reason why so many companies are hybrid. I think it just elevated the request for hybrid. There's actually been, and I love this statistic, and Hayley, I haven't shared this with you, over 460% increase during the pandemic of people looking for some remote opportunity. So if we're not in the hybrid now, we're certainly going to be in the hybrid in the future. And I think we're going to see a lot more remote work in the future. So I was surprised that it was such a large percentage of an increase. And why are people looking at hybrid? Certainly from an employer perspective, they're finding because of everybody's demands that there's increased productivity. They're also finding a decreased productivity. And I think that's one of the places that emotional intelligence can help. So we have some conflict. Some are arguing that it's a decreased cost because some companies are closing their offices or closing part of their offices, or they're trying to maintain some of the offices and trying to figure out what to do with it or rearrange their offices. It's allowing for some upskilling as people are trying to look at how to deal with collaboration, much like we've had to do in a global environment as well. For employees, it's giving them considerable more autonomy as they are working more independently or at home. It's changing the way they actually engage at work. So there's a lot of change management that's at play. And I think that's another way that emotional intelligence really can come in. Right now, we're looking at over 55% of employees are working 3 days or more in a remote situation. 54% of those said they would actually leave a company if they couldn't work from home. So there is a lot of pressure on companies to get this hybrid situation down and make sure they're dealing with a level of engagement. You always hear about this great resignation. Emotional intelligence is a good way to try to address some of the concerns of the population. It's kind of interesting because when you deal with those employee statistics with over 50% of the population wanting to work at home, there's a counter side to that. And that's 87% of those that are typically polled also want in-person collaboration. So I want my cake and eat it too, I think is that analogy, right? So in the end, employees want all things. They want to work remotely and they want to work in the office, at least some sort of face-to-face collaboration. So we're going to talk about a potential solution for that situation in a little bit.
You brought up a really great point, David, when you mentioned earlier about the change management, because just in the last couple of years, it's been a lot of change management. It went from going to the office every day to being strictly at home every single day, to then slowly opening back up and then figuring out what that looked like. And now, you know, last week, we probably all saw in the news how some employers were like, come back to work or else, you know, you're fired. So you have that change going on now. So it's a lot of things and people are like, am I ready to go back? Was that the most important emotional intelligence way to address that situation? You know, so we'll get into that more, but it does all come together as you brought out.
So, you know, a couple of headlines about Elon and emotional intelligence. So he's a popular editorial, as it were. We also see some trends about wanting to work remotely or not based upon generations. And I found this really particularly interesting, that when you look at the different generations, it's almost flat across what percentage of the population wants to work full in the office. Apparently not so many. But when you look at how many want to work remote, I would have anticipated, shame on me, that Gen Z really would have wanted to be the higher that wanted full remote. And yet it's really Gen X and the baby boomers, not so much the newest generation. And I'm just curious, when you hear some of that, is that a surprise? Is that what you would have expected? And why? So maybe Hayley, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but please drop it in the chat as we talk.
It is, because I'm hearing that a lot of the Gen Z, they really want to be more in the office, that they want that face-to-face contact and they want the training, as opposed to more seasoned workers and those in that Gen X and baby boomer era. They have, you know, had the training, they have the experience, and they feel comfortable in their jobs, and so they don't maybe require as much training. So that is surprising to see that, but yeah, it's very, very interesting to see those stats.
And I was just curious because the way people blend their worlds, there's certainly a different, I thought, assumption regarding Gen Z and millennials, which much have a more blended type of world typically. So I would imagine more of the remote, where Gen Z and the Gen X and the baby boomers typically are more further along in their lives and have different responsibilities. So I'm truly fascinated. Jennifer Love, really good point. I think that some people do like the boundary of home and work separated. And then some people seem to be able to separate it no matter where they are. So I am fascinated what this means for people. For me, from an emotional intelligence perspective, it means as a leader, you have to pay attention to your population. You have to know them. We're going to talk about that. And as an individual, you're bringing to the table your own stuff, your own preferences. So it's important to know, I truly do believe diversity matters. And you have to understand what it is from an age population, what it is from the person's unique situation, what they're bringing to the table. And that is part of emotional intelligence. So we had over 74% of US companies are choosing hybrid. And I'm sure it's not just because they want to be more emotionally intelligent. Indeed, here's the top 5 reasons: health and wellness, employee productivity, access to talent, makes sense to me, Align employees to the mission and diversity, equity, and inclusion, with over 84% choosing to go hybrid from a health and wellness perspective. What's interesting though, when you add on to that, less than 15% of these companies are actually offering training to their managers on how to support their employees, or emotional intelligence, or really how to have the employees support themselves. So I think there's a great opportunity for the people on the call to really make a difference in your own lives and in the lives of the people with whom you work. So let's get a little deep dive on emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence in general. So how many people have actually heard of emotional intelligence? Just shoot in the chat. Yes, no. All right. Love all the yeses. Ooh, it's like the ones. We have all yeses. Ooh, I like the yeah. Somebody talks like
we have a very emotionally intelligent group today.
There we go. There we go. So let's just do a brief review. So in general, with emotional intelligence, there's 4 quadrants. There's self-awareness, and it's depending upon what model you use, can have slight variation. So you tend to have, from a self perspective, that self-awareness. What do I know about me? What am I bringing to the table? As I like to call it, and I always laugh about it, what's my stuff? What is the stuff that I'm bringing to the table? What do I know about me? And then regulation, which is self-management. What am I doing with that stuff? What am I doing with what I know about me? If I know, for example, that being late is something that I have a tendency to do, am I managing that? Am I trying to make sure that I'm on time? Do I change my clocks so that they actually give me a couple extra minutes, which is a lot of share, because that's exactly what I do. How transparent am I as a leader with what my intentions are, which is a huge part of being a good leader. What is my achievement? What am I striving to do? How am I demonstrating that? When you go over to the other half, you have social awareness. So that's, what do I know about other people, their diversity issues? Organizational awareness, what do I know about the norms and the rules of the organization? What is the service expectation? And then I like to think of relationship management as the wrap up. So based upon what I know about me, what I know about the others, how am I handling all that? How am I, as a leader, am I developing other people? We talked about change. How am I handling change, conflict? Am I building bonds? Am I building teams? And teamwork is a hot topic when it comes to working hybrid. I don't know about you, Hayley, but a lot of the clients that I see are talking to me about concerns that they have in the hybrid environment about working with other people, especially the leaders, what's working, what's not working. I just had a client just yesterday talk about a hybrid situation, which she was really struggling with this individual. And we actually talked about, in that case, social awareness and how much she knew and she didn't know about that individual. Are you seeing some cases, sessions about that as well?
Yes, I definitely have some of my clients experiencing that same thing. One thing that comes up a lot with the hybrid is accountability and holding people accountable. So because everybody's hybrid, some managers and leaders are wondering, how do I make them accountable? How do I make sure they're working? Things like that come up, and they don't want to micromanage. Of course, they don't want to turn into that leader of being that micromanager. But also, if they do have employees that may be struggling on meeting deadlines or keeping up with their work, how do they help them? How do they really reach out to them in this hybrid environment and really help support them? And one thing that I really share with my clients is, like, I think someone even put it in the chat earlier, is getting to know, and you mentioned too, getting to know each employee and what works best for them and what's going to help them thrive in their situation to help them be productive and be able to reach their goals. And empathy comes in a lot. Empathy is one of the main things with emotional intelligence, and being a great leader is also being an empathetic leader. And that involves really getting to know your employees and really what makes them tick, how they like to be recognized, and how they like to work.
So there's a lot that we certainly hear about, and if we could ever help anybody, let us know. When we look at emotional intelligence in the workforce, and particularly in the hybrid workforce, Here's some of the benefits that have been shown with emotional intelligence at work, and particularly in the hybrid community. One, people with higher emotional intelligence, particularly leaders with higher emotional intelligence, actually have increased productivity themselves. I would argue that they could actually help others with increasing their productivity and efficiency. Much higher employee satisfaction, and in a world where employees are picking and choosing, thus the Great Resignation, employee satisfaction and employee engagement really is important. There is certainly a financial benefit. People are having an increased market share as well. So if you ever want to do have a drive for emotional intelligence, there's good stats on that. It's financially beneficial for an organization. Certainly better emotional, mental, and well-being. We certainly saw that 84% are choosing hybrid for that reason. So here's a good way to really tie emotional intelligence to the main reason companies are choosing to go hybrid. There's 52% with the fear of job loss, and then that openness to change that we talked about. So we really can be there from an emotionally intelligent situation. Those of you, all these people who know emotional intelligence, you have an opportunity to make a difference in the hybrid community for sure. Let's go a little bit deeper then with emotional intelligence in the hybrid world. So what does it mean then to be emotionally intelligent or highly emotionally intelligent in that hybrid world? I think, Hayley, you really talked about it as well. When you look at yourself, it's important to notice how that change has affected you, right? Are you now working from home several days a week? Do you have children, dogs, different situations at home that are pulling your focus? How are you handling that? How are you handling being a team leader who may never see their team other than virtual situations? So it's really, from a self perspective, really important to know your own thoughts and values. Some of you may not even like hybrid. Some of you may be like Elon, want everybody in. It's important to really evaluate yourselves as individuals, what you are, how this has affected you. From a self-management perspective, it's really important also to look at how that is all materializing. Is your frustration for a situation bubbling up a lot? Or is your love of that hybrid and being able, as somebody create the barriers between work and personal life, is that really effective? Are you managing that? Is it managing you? I had a client yesterday who was very much having difficulty with managing the barriers and was really struggling on how he wanted to go back and forth. Sometimes he wanted a barrier, sometimes he didn't want a barrier, and it was causing a lot of conflict for him. From a social awareness perspective, are you paying attention to the rules of the company, the rules of your team? What's going on? How are you managing the deadlines and other people's expectations? Even rules for virtual meetings, are you following them? Do they have agendas? Do they have purpose? Do they have outcomes that are clearly defined and clearly communicated? We joked earlier about cameras on, cameras off. That is probably one of the hottest topics. And I do have an opinion on it, and I will share it a little bit. When it comes to a hybrid community, and certainly in a virtual collaboration world. And then from a relationship perspective, given all this, are you maintaining openness yourself? Are you really open to new situations? Hayley mentioned how critical change is and change management. How open are you yourself to change? Or from a self-awareness perspective, are you planting your feet regarding change? From a leadership perspective, there are things that we could do, and I would argue that you don't have to be a people leader to be a leader. There are things that you could do as a leader to really show higher level of emotional intelligence. If I'm a leader, I'm going to ask my team, what are your preferences? What are the styles that you're bringing to the table? What are the social situations that you're paying attention to? Wow, this is your first remote job. How's that working out for you? What can I do as a manager? So there's that self-management element coming in. What can I do to support you, to help you be successful? What barriers are you facing that I need to help you address? I always like, as a manager, to ask, what's working, what's not working, and what I could do to help you out. 3 simple questions. And I think that takes us from self-awareness to self-management. What am I doing as a leader? And into social awareness as well. What do I know about other people? Taking a little side back to self-management. Hayley, you talked about empathy a little bit ago. I think that vulnerability and that transparency really is a critical element when it comes to emotional intelligence in a hybrid environment. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about that, because I think this really does pertain well here.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking with those questions you just shared, those are excellent, excellent questions for leaders to ask their team as they're talking, because it helps them to build that relationship management. Because when you set those guidelines and say everybody has to do this or else, that's not showing emotional intelligence, because you're not knowing or aware of the needs of each of your employees. You don't, as you were out to, knowing their situation, knowing how they work best. So all that works and helps build those relationships, and it helps build strong, supportive teams. And that also brings along with, we're not saying go be super nosy or, dig into people's lives, but understand what their situations are. Maybe someone has, they have an appointment or something like that, a doctor's appointment or something. Being understanding with things like that allow them the flexibility. And you also mentioned something around boundaries earlier. Boundaries are so important. I find a lot of my clients who are, especially leaders, are struggling with the boundaries right now because they're in so many meetings. They have so many other things that they're dealing with that they don't have time to then do their work. And then they're working long hours. And then what is it going to lead to? It's going to lead to burnout, right? And they want to avoid that. So all these things come together in helping them build a really strong, supportive team, but also keeping themselves built up from experiencing burnout and being able to have a really great team, a collaborative team in this hybrid environment.
I think that's a great point. And actually, I think it ties nicely to Jennifer's comment in the chat. And that's the importance of transparency with your communication. Stop assuming that you know what the other person's thinking, right? Ask the darn question, what's going on? Let me not assume that I know. Just had a client this morning, and that's exactly what she was doing. She was making a lot of assumptions. So we talked about how she could step it back and actually ask a lot of questions. And I think it's also important to communicate what you're thinking, especially as a leader, as an individual. Hey, I'm rolling this out because I pulse checked the team and this is what I thought. Or I'm rolling this out because we're trying to do this as a company. A lot of times I found in my human resources career, we would roll something out and forget to communicate the why. And so much of change and dealing with change is understanding the why and trying to get it from it's happening to me, I don't know what's going on, to understanding that I'm part of the change and part of the communication. So really good point, Jennifer, thank you so much. And just to wrap up and add on a supplement to what Hayley was saying, from a relationship management, as a leader, try to have an open door. Try to keep that dialogue as open as possible. That's part of the transparency, but it's also part of knowing your team. I'm dealing a lot with some clients who don't feel their managers have an open door. They don't know how to approach the manager. So I think that's really important. Also talk about what your expectations are regarding engagement. What does that look like? What does that look like for somebody who is working remote 3 days a week? How is that person showing that they're engaged when they're not in the office? Or is it a matter of they check into Slack periodically? There's so many actually technology programs that can actually monitor people's laptops. And I wouldn't suggest that, although I think there's some value to that, as much as I would suggest having that relationship between the manager and the employee, checking in, understanding the rules of engagement, let people know what your availability, how they could reach out. And indeed, 72% of companies expect to actually spend a lot more money on virtual collaboration in the future. So you're going to hear this as a really hot topic coming up. So if you're leaders in an organization or you're in an organization, start looking at that technology and really how it's going to help the population that you're working with. And I think the last part of relationship management is be authentic. be honest. Hey, this is a struggle for me too. I'm trying to figure out how to address my family needs as I address the employment situation. People expect me to be available all the time now. I don't know what that means. I don't want to do that. Be honest with your team. Try to remain as positive as possible. And you're going to find that people feel much, much more connected in the environment. Some of the ways that could appear so that you're walking away with examples is one of the areas that I see coming up a lot is the idea of companies that have remote populations or companies that are in a hybrid situation are at least trying to have some element of face-to-face. So I see an increased request from companies to have at least quarterly or semi-annual face-to-face meetings. And given that some of the pandemic issues have changed and we see a lot more transportation going on, a lot more flight and a lot more driving, we see a lot more requests for quarterly meetings. And indeed, that one client that I talked about that was starting to struggle with, does he want to be with people? Does he not want to be with people? Is invited to one of these first quarterly collaboration meetings next week. And he's really excited because he gets a chance and then he can balance it out. So he's looking at how he could interact with people. So I highly recommend quarterly controlled face-to-face conversations or collaborations, as I like to call them. Also start looking at how you can use technology from an emotional intelligence perspective to really tie your folks together. So I mentioned Slack. I think Slack has some pros and cons, or Slack channels. I think sometimes people expect it to be, everything goes into Slack. That's a thought. I think other times it's, hey, just once a day, let's check into Slack. I think that's an idea as well. I am seeing more subtopic specific Slack channels, which is really kind of interesting. So from a diversity perspective, hey, people who have an interest in coding, there's a coding Slack channel, or perhaps women leaders in the company have their own Slack channel. So it's a beautiful way to flex the interest from an emotionally intelligent way to some people who have some things in common, but maybe not everybody who has that in common. So that's one thing to think about. I'm not advocating for Slack per se. There's many methodologies that are out there. I also see a lot of flexibility or flexing with emotional intelligence, particularly in a hybrid situation, when it comes to recognition. Certainly, we always talk about recognition in the workplace in general and making sure it's specific as possible and unique to that individual, particularly with a hybrid situation when everybody's going through so many of their own stuff. As I said before, it's important to make sure that recognition is as meaningful to that person and as unique to that person as possible, whether it's delivered in a one-on-one, in a team setting, or in a larger group situation, really making sure that your recognition is there. It will increase the level of engagement, it will increase the level of satisfaction, and each person will feel recognized, especially if you're feeling frustrated by your employee interaction as a leader or as a colleague. Feel free to give peer recognition. I think that too often we focus on manager and employee, but I think peer-to-peer feedback and peer-to-peer recognition can certainly make all the difference when it comes to emotional intelligence in an environment such as hybrid. I've only worked for one organization that actually sparked peer-to-peer feedback as sort of the way of the culture. And I could see as soon as we launched that, engagement went up and satisfaction went up. And then certainly look at rules around virtual collaboration. How can you use team meetings better, more? How can you as a leader certainly get to know your team better, but how can your team also get to know each other better? So again, if you think about emotional intelligence, it's the self, it's what I'm doing with that, it's the other, and what we're doing that together. If you think larger from a team perspective, then the opportunity to, hey, let's get to know each other better. What are the expectations that we have for each other? What are the norms that we expect from each other? Flesh that out, have an honest dialogue, and you're going to find that it will be a much more productive team in the end. Hayley, do you have any other things that you like to recommend or any other suggestions that you have that could increase emotional intelligence in that hybrid environment?
Yeah, one of the main ones that you brought up was having that communication, asking those questions so that you know how people like to communicate. And I think that's one of the main things throughout this with emotional intelligence is communication. Someone brought up earlier, transparency. And asking those questions to know what works best is really, really important. And also being just aware, like we talked about earlier, like with having cameras on, that really helps build connection. Now if you have the option, of course, most meetings have the options of not having their camera on. But if you are in your team meetings, it builds connection you're able to have. I know when I was working in one of my previous roles, we would have cameras on Fridays. So on Fridays, you could have your cameras off Monday through Thursday if you wanted to, or have it on. But on Fridays, they wanted everybody to turn their camera on and just have that, 15 minutes of just talking about what are we going to do for the weekend, how everybody's doing. So taking that little break also of not always having every meeting be focused on work, but just how everyone's doing. Something simple as that. Let's just talk. Put work aside and let's talk about what's going on. Turn on your camera. Show your dog if your kids are at home. What's your kid doing? Come and say hi to everybody. It builds connection, and that communication, it builds bonds, and it really helps increase the emotional intelligence and draws us closer together in this hybrid environment. A lot of people have felt they've lost that connection over the past years if they've strictly been in hybrid. So now you can continue to build those relationships, and then when you see each other in the office too, you're able to say, hey, how's the puppy going, or how's the kids going? I saw them on camera. What happened? So you're, again, still building on that relationship, and that's definitely increasing your emotional intelligence skills.
So I'm going to parking lot that conversation about cameras for just a moment, because you also said something that I want to just go back to. And that's when you were talking about the intimate dialogue that you can have with other people, it was reminding me about how significant, particularly with emotional intelligence, one-on-ones are with managers and employees. When you think of all that we're asking you to do to raise your emotional intelligence, it really gives you, a one-on-one gives you the opportunity to really truly build that individual relationship and ask those questions to get to know somebody from a social awareness perspective, get to know their nuances, what they like. Now I recommend that as a leader in general, but particularly in a hybrid community, we recommend that you spend time. And so the questions that I talked about earlier that Hayley was talking about, the what's working, what's not working, what do I need to do different, what great questions to ask for teams, but also in the one-on-one situations. What do I need to do? What do I need to know that's affecting you from being successful? What are suggestions that you have to be more successful? What recommendations do you have for me as a leader? What recommendations do you have for me as your colleague? So I didn't want to go past that, Hayley, because I think that one-on-ones are really, really important. I've seen actually companies do away with performance management systems totally, and scores at the end of the year because the one-on-ones are giving such great information. So huge fan of one-on-ones. Want to give you a chance to talk about that. And then I want to go back to that camera because I think you're touching on a hot topic.
Yes, I mean, the one-on-ones, they're like my go-to when I'm coaching with my clients is in that one-on-one, have that discussion. I had a client a couple months ago. They had an employee that were dealing with some challenges. And I asked them, have you asked them, what is the challenges? Have you asked them, how can I help you? They said, no, I hadn't. They asked that employee, how can I help you? The whole story changed. That employee opened up. They found out so much from just one simple question. What challenges are you experiencing? How can I help you? And we may, take that for granted, but that is such a powerful question because it does so many different things. We talked about, if you go back, we were talking about the self-management, the self-awareness, the social, all that, it brings it together because they're showing empathy. They're showing they care. They're giving the person floor. They're showing communication. They're having transparency. And they're being vulnerable in that sense to say, hey, I'm here to help you. Because maybe that employee could have viewed the leader as not really being interested or not being invested in them. But that question opens up the door for them to show that you care.
Absolutely. Really good point. So let's go back to the parking lot. Let's go back to the camera, because I don't think you and I always share the same perspective. So I love the fact that camera, and I too see companies going to meeting lists, as I think Ed called it, meet list Mondays. And I've heard of Freedom Fridays. We have a lot of Freedom Fridays out there that I hear about, where people are free of meetings, so they don't have to worry about cameras or not cameras, meetings or not meetings. They have freedom in their schedule, which is really weird, because I do wonder how that's going to, really interesting, sorry. I do wonder how that's going to play out with all the push for a 4-day work week that I see rising in the news. So I think that's going to be really interesting. But let's talk about those virtual meetings and the camera. So from a preference perspective, and I know a lot of people have cameras on or camera off, it certainly is revealing, right? If you have if you have your camera on, you are sharing a little bit of whatever situation you're in. And so the dog comment was a hoot for me, because it used to be, no, you don't show your kid, you don't show your dog, you don't show anything, you're in a meeting. It's got to be all work related. And what I actually see now is exactly what you said, Hayley. Sure, if the dog jumps on the table, they jump on the table. Now, not everybody is happy about that, and certainly was in a call yesterday where a cat decided to take over the meeting, was doing a fantastic job of facilitation as it was, but certainly took over the meeting. But we see people really more comfortable or less uncomfortable, I guess, with sharing a little bit of their personal lives. And I think that the virtual world has taken on a different level of collaboration lately. From an emotional intelligence perspective, I actually take the stance of, this may not be popular, cameras on, if at all possible. Because from an emotional intelligence perspective, if I'm the one speaking out, I like the idea of seeing somebody's nonverbal. I like the idea of trying to connect with somebody and seeing their whole perspective, and really getting a sense of the nuances, or if they're communicating, what are their facial expressions? What hand gestures are going on? Are they really attending to the meeting? I do think that the world multitasks during meetings, and that's not always the most productive. So camera on kind of gives you a little bit into the world. I see that somebody is on a camera on 100% for smaller meetings. For large informal, yeah, I think that larger meetings can be really, really tough. It does help with body language. Do you, Hayley, so when you were saying cameras, I think you were leaning a little bit more towards camera off. I don't know. So what do you see as the pros and cons to cameras when it comes to emotional intelligence?
I'm a mix. So I kind of agree with the comment that if it is a smaller group, then it definitely builds, camaraderie. I think when you see each other and it's more intimate, you're more vulnerable, as opposed to definitely when it's a larger crowd, it's a lot more people. So we tend to, shut our cameras off. So I'm 50-50. I'm going to say it depends on the setting and the audience of the meeting.
Yeah, all right, that's fair. And I love Mandy's comment. It's really about trying to establish active participation. So whatever you need to do to establish active participation, and for some people that might indeed be cameras off. I think that actually that's a really good chat comment, because you have to know your team, right? That's part of emotional intelligence and diversity. What are the norms of the team? What is the expectations of the team? And what is the what works for the vibe of the team? And a lot of people do have assumptions that make about camera on versus camera off. I always think that about multitasking. So it's a pet peeve for me, because I'm guilty of it at times. Sherry, don't tell anybody. And I tend to be, if I know the camera's on, I'm being observed, so I can be more into it. I think it's just having that honest conversation at work and really trying to figure out what are the norms and what are the expectations, and really kind of staying aligned to those norms and expectations. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm really loving the thoughts there in the chat too. Really different viewpoints. And overall, as you said, really knowing what works best for the team and seeing how they like to interact and have those situations, because sometimes if you force, maybe you have a leader that does force camera, and maybe the rule is cameras on, then maybe that's putting someone on the team in a really uncomfortable position. But then on the flip side, maybe it's making someone a little shy, maybe come out a little bit more, and helping them to open up. So it really comes down to really knowing the team and knowing how they interact, what's best for the interaction of the team. And I love that, of course, when we're in person, when you're in the office, you don't come in with a blinder on or a mask on or a hat or, something over your face, but we all see each other. So it's, again, adapting to the circumstances. Maybe if you have, as a leader, maybe if you're doing both, maybe in the office, we all just see each other. Maybe at home, maybe your team is super busy. So maybe they are able to turn their cameras off and multitask. They're still able to be involved. So I agree with you too, Dave, about the multitasking. That's definitely, people turn their cameras off and do both, but still be engaged. So
I'm vulnerable and transparent enough to admit I do the multitasking thing on occasion, not all the time. Sherry, certainly not when you're facilitating. But I also think that as part of that virtual collaboration, maybe there's, like, I love Ed's idea of the meaningless Mondays, and I certainly have heard of the Fridays as well. I actually, that's the first time I've heard about it on Mondays. So I'm loving that, because Mondays can be such an interesting day.
yeah.
Because people are starting back into work week. So I might steal that for a couple suggestions. I think the other part of that is really understanding what you want to accomplish and really giving that flexibility. I agree, Terry. I think it does make me self-conscious in ways that I'm not always comfortable. I don't want people just staring at everything about me. And certainly, Ron, I agree. If I'm sick, I don't want to be on camera. I probably wouldn't be in the office either. So to use Hayley's point, I probably wouldn't be around the office with tissues everywhere, or I probably shouldn't be if I am choosing to do that. So interesting, but ask your team, just have the open dialogue. So I'd love to hear, sort of as we go to close, we have about 10 minutes left. What examples do you all have? So let's teach each other, right? Peer to peer. What examples do you have of things you're doing in the workplace? Good question. What brought you to the training today is another way to word this. I love this, meatless Mondays. We're stealing that, Hayley.
Yeah, you gotta definitely put that into practice.
So again, what examples are you doing or supporting in the workplace? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. That's because everybody's busy typing. Wow, it's a baggage. I mean, that is something to unpack. Attempting to find ways to approach people that are not approachable. Jennifer, I want you in a one-on-one conversation on that for sure. But you're right, when people are upset, when people are going through whatever challenges, it's really important to be able to show them compassion and support as much as possible at the level they're looking. And I think that's a beautiful way to show emotional intelligence. Removing my assumptions before asking questions or taking action. Way to go on self-awareness. We all do make assumptions. I think we all have prejudices that sort of guide us and things that we like, things that we don't like. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to remove assumptions. I am a big one for not always showing my facial expressions. So I can come off, if you watch my facial expressions versus my voice, I can come off as flat or disinterested, or at least that's the feedback I've gotten. So people can make assumptions about that. Why? What is going on? Is he really not interested? Is it really doesn't care about what I'm saying? And that's really not the message that I'm trying to send. I'm really that intently listening. So I want to hold any expressions because I really want to hear what the other person's saying. So I have to monitor that all the time. Rana, we have a social committee to connect people outside of work environment. Oh, I love that. Meet and eat events.
Ooh, right. Can I come?
What's better than the happy hours? I was going to suggest the virtual happy hours, but I always worry about that because of the alcohol. Meet and eat Absolutely. I did do one, we had one organization where we had a walk the dog. So everybody would walk the dog and get on the phone, and we would have to face as much as possible. I'm not coordinated enough to do that with my dog. So she just sat like jumping on me, but I think that's a clever way. Any other way to connect. I love that. I think that focusing on connecting in alternate ways than just work is what we lost by going to virtual, because we're not, as Hayley mentioned, I don't see it walking down the hallway. I would say I don't see it at the water cooler, but I haven't seen a water cooler in a very long time. I don't see it at the coffee machine or the coffee.
There you go.
That's certainly it. I do love that idea of trying to come up with different ways, and you do not have to be the manager. It can be, again, peer-to-peer. And I really think from emotional intelligence and building that, we have to spend time really getting to know each other. Talk about self personally, our hobbies. I think that some people are going to feel comfortable with that. Some people are not. So I think flex your emotional intelligence depending upon the situation. I think even with that, I see people with flexible work hours. So some people are coming in early, some people are coming later, some people come in certain days of the week. We certainly have that in our office situation at Ama La Vida. People are coming in certain different times and certainly different hours. And I work totally remotely, so I have not seen our office yet. But I love the idea of showing people compassion and support and meeting them where they are. So good examples. A fund director. A fund director plans B-Day and milestone celebrations. Okay. I like that.
Really creative ideas. This is great. You guys have really nice offices and nice things that planned for your teams to help. That's really wonderful.
To say, Shari, are you taking some notes? We have some things that we could certainly implement here. So, say again?
I saved the chat, so we would definitely have it.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah. So again, from an action perspective, as we round out the final couple minutes, what will you commit to? What are you doing now that you absolutely will do more of? Or what ideas are you borrowing, not stealing, but borrowing, using, making the best of? What do you see as a strength that somebody suggested, or maybe that Hayley and I talked about, that you are going to use at work? Make a note of that and try to commit to at least one thing that you're going to take away from today's conversation and do at work. The hybrid model is certainly giving companies a lot of flexibility, and it's certainly, again, a popular way to work, as is emotional intelligence, as we've seen. So there's a great opportunity to marry the two in a very productive way to be really successful. So I challenge you all. I'm a big accountability person. You all have a homework assignment, so that when you walk away from here, I'm holding you, I don't know how to hold you accountable, hold yourselves accountable on taking an action from today's conversation. Hayley, Shari, any additional thoughts?
I just love the action. So definitely set that commitment for yourself and hold yourself accountable to see if maybe you can incorporate one of the ideas in the chat, or maybe something else you thought about of how you can continue to build those relationships at work with your coworkers using emotional intelligence.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm also loving what I saw in the chat. Like I said, I saved the chat. And there's a bunch of things you can do. David just asked you to hold yourselves accountable. I've been putting stuff in the chat throughout the whole time that says, check out our YouTube, go to our website, email me, email Hayley, email David. Dropping in one.
Shari, I lost the sound. There you go. I thought you were
automatically put me on mute. Hold yourself accountable. One way to do that is to set up an appointment with one of our relationship specialists to find out how you might be able to coach with Hayley or David and talk about this. You could literally start your coaching journey with this. Here's my action. Here's what I did. Here are the results, and then take it from there. Because you do spend so much of your life at work, and we have changed our work method so much that these things that David and Hayley talked about today are just paramount to the top of what we do here. So we help personally, we also help at the professional level, businesses. So I see Jennifer asked for additional resources on this topic. Please check our blog, check our YouTube. I think it dropped all that in the chat earlier. Tons and tons of complimentary and free resources and tools that you can use there. Would love to see some of you, like I said, pop up on even my calendar as a relationship strategist to talk to you further about how we can work with you and what ALV can do to help you enact some of these things that you all talked about today and marry remote workplace with EI and how does that all come together. And I heard all things about listening and being accountable and being transparent, you know, as well as infusing some of that personal fun.
Right.
We have a hell of a random channel here.
Sherry, one of the things that you may not know about, but Hayley and I are both certified to do culture assessments with emotional intelligence. So if you see that there's an opportunity and you really want to increase your engagement across this hybrid environment, we can do an emotional intelligence culture assessment and come up with coaching ideas and development plans to try to help out individuals, teams, groups. So it's just another way to use a coaching resource to try to help you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Anybody have any last minute questions that you want to pop in the chat or come off and talk to David and Hayley? Awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you all so much for coming.